The panic struck in 8 languages at once. Ben Carter froze mid-step as chaos erupted across Lincoln Memorial Plaza. Italian hands gestured wildly. German voices thundered. A Japanese woman sobbed. French curses flew. The tour group scattered like startled birds. Their guide vanished, leaving behind only a crumpled business card and 8 terrified strangers who couldn't understand each other's fear. His daughter Zoe gripped his hand. "Daddy, help them." Ben's throat tightened. 5 years. 5 years of hiding what he could do. 5 years of being invisible. The elderly Italian woman stumbled. Her purse spilled. She cried out in desperation. Ben snapped. "Scusi, signora." The words exploded from him before he could stop them. "Posso aiutarla?" Then German, French, Japanese, Korean, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian. Each language flowed like water, like breathing, like coming back to life. The group stared, mouths agape, eyes wide, but it was the woman in the back who made Ben's blood freeze. She stepped from the shadows, her calculating gaze locked on him, and whispered something that would change everything he thought he knew about starting over. Ben's hands trembled as he guided the Italian couple toward their taxi. Mrs. Benedetti clutched his arm, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Grazie, signore. Lei è un angelo." "You are an angel." If only she knew the truth. Angels didn't have blood on their hands. Angels didn't run from their past like cowards. He helped the German family into the second cab, their children finally quiet after his gentle words in their native tongue. The Japanese woman bowed deeply, her gratitude evident despite the language barrier now dissolved. In 20 minutes, Ben had solved what professional tour guides couldn't handle in 2 hours. Zoe watched everything with those perceptive 8-year-old eyes. She understood more than most adults, even without words. Autism had given her a different kind of sight, one that cut through pretense and found the raw truth beneath. "Daddy," she whispered in Spanish, their secret language. "The sad lady is still watching you." Ben didn't need to turn around. He could feel those calculating eyes burning into his back like laser points. The woman had observed every interaction, every linguistic switch, every gesture of kindness he'd shown the panicked tourists. The last taxi pulled away, taking with it the evidence of what Ben had just done. What he'd sworn never to do again. He'd exposed himself, revealed the skills that marked him as Benjamin Carter, former military translator, not Ben the night security guard who spoke broken English and kept his head down, his carefully constructed invisible life cracking like ice under spring sun. The woman stepped closer, her designer shoes clicking against the marble steps. Even disguised in casual clothes, everything about her screamed corporate boardroom. "That was incredible," she said, her voice smooth as aged whiskey. 8 languages, fluent conversation, crisis management. You're either extremely well-educated or extremely well-trained. Ben turned slowly, Zoe's small hand still anchored in his. The woman stood 3 feet away, posture perfect, smile calculated. "I'm Adrian Wells," she continued, extending a manicured hand. "Strategic consultant." Those 2 words hit Ben like a physical blow. Strategic consultant. The same job title that had destroyed his world 5 years ago. Ben didn't take the offered hand. His military training kicked in, reading body language, cataloging details, designer jeans that cost more than his monthly rent. Watch that could pay Zoe's school fees for a year. Casual clothes that fooled no one who knew how to look. "Just someone who likes languages," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Adrian's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition? Calculation? The predatory look of someone who'd found exactly what they were hunting for. She pulled out a business card, thick stock with elegant lettering. "A. Wells, Strategic Solutions." Ben's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. Strategic Solutions. The subsidiary company that had ended everything good in his life. The name that still gave him nightmares 5 years later. "We should go," he said abruptly, scooping Zoe into his arms. "It's past bedtime." But as they walked away, he heard Adrian call out, her voice carrying across the plaza like a promise and a threat. "I'll be in town for a while, Ben. Something tells me we have more to discuss than you realize." 3 days passed before Ben saw Adrian again. 3 sleepless nights of checking locks twice, of watching Zoe's face for signs that their world might crumble again. He'd Googled the name A. Wells Strategic Solutions obsessively, finding hundreds of contradictory results. Corporate restructuring specialist, efficiency expert, freelance consultant. Nothing concrete. Nothing that explained the ice in his veins when she'd spoken his name, like she already knew exactly who he was. Tuesday evening found them at Meridian Hill Park, Zoe's favorite spot for watching the sunset. She sat cross-legged on their worn blanket, arranging small stones in precise patterns, a self-soothing ritual that helped her process the day's overstimulation. Ben pretended to read a paperback thriller, but his eyes constantly scanned the area. Old habits. Military training never truly faded, especially when you had something precious to protect. The park buzzed with its usual evening crowd. Joggers, dog walkers, young families claiming patches of grass before dark. Beautiful evening for questioning your entire life, isn't it? Adrian's voice came from the bench behind them, making Ben's paperback snap shut. How had she approached without him noticing? Professional training of a different sort, perhaps. "I'm sorry," she continued, settling onto the grass beside their blanket uninvited. That sounded more ominous than intended. She wore jeans and a Georgetown University sweatshirt, the kind of calculated casual that cost more than Ben's monthly grocery budget, but was designed to look approachable. Zoe looked up from her stones, studying Adrian with frank curiosity. Most adults made her nervous, their energy too loud, their movements too unpredictable. But Adrian sat perfectly still, her voice soft and even, respecting the invisible boundaries that autistic children needed. "Those are beautiful patterns," Adrian said. "Very mathematical. Are you working on a sequence?" Zoe nodded solemnly and showed her the arrangement. Fibonacci spirals created with smooth river rocks, each one precisely placed according to some internal logic only she understood. "She's brilliant," Ben said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Sees patterns everywhere, languages, numbers, music, it all connects for her." Adrian smiled, and for a moment the calculating mask slipped. Something genuine flickered across her features, softening the sharp corporate edges. "My grandmother had synesthesia," she said quietly. "She could see numbers as colors, hear shapes in music. The world was more for her, more intense, more beautiful, more overwhelming." The personal revelation caught Ben off guard. Strategic consultants didn't usually share family stories with strangers in parks. "You said you'd be in town for a while," Ben said carefully, his voice neutral despite the tension coiling in his chest. "Business or pleasure?" Adrian's laugh held no humor, brittle as autumn leaves. "Is there a difference anymore? I'm taking what my assistant calls an extended sabbatical. My company thinks I'm having a breakdown." She picked up one of Zoe's stones, turning it over in her palm with reverent care. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am finally breaking down after years of holding everything together." Ben's blood turned to mercury, heavy and poisonous in his veins. "What kind of breakdown leads someone to strategic consulting?" he asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Adrian set the stone back down carefully, maintaining Zoe's precise pattern. 5 years ago I made some decisions that I thought were right, necessary, efficient. Her voice grew quieter, more fragile. I told myself it was just business. Numbers on a spreadsheet, personnel optimization, cost reduction strategies. The corporate buzzwords fell from her lips like confessions. "Daddy," Zoe said suddenly, switching to Spanish, their language for emotional observations. "The lady's eyes are leaking salt water." Tears. Adrian was crying, so quietly that Ben almost missed it. Professional composure cracking like a dam under too much pressure. "I'm sorry," Adrian whispered, wiping her cheeks with shaking fingers. "I don't usually. This isn't like me. I don't break down in public parks with strangers." She stood abruptly, professional mask sliding back into place like armor. I should go. This was inappropriate. But Ben caught her wrist as she turned away. The contact sent electricity through both of them. Recognition, terror, something deeper and more dangerous. "Strategic solutions," he said, his voice barely audible above the evening sounds of the park. "You worked for Strategic Solutions 5 years ago." Adrian went absolutely still, her pulse hammering under his fingers. "How do you—" Then her eyes widened in horror, pupils dilating with the shock of recognition. "Oh, God! Benjamin Carter, military translator, freelance contractor, specialized in crisis communication and cultural mediation." The world tilted sideways like a ship taking on water. Ben released her wrist as if it had burned him, stepping back instinctively to shield Zoe from whatever explosion was coming. "You," he breathed, the word torn from his throat like a prayer or a curse. "You're the efficiency expert who destroyed my life." Adrian's face went pale as moonlight, all the blood draining from her cheeks. "You were on the list," she whispered. "The termination list I submitted to the board. Benjamin Carter, high-cost contractor, recommended for immediate dismissal." "Daddy!" Zoe's voice cut through the tension like a bell, small and scared and confused. Both adults looked down at her, this brilliant child who'd lost her mother and nearly lost her father's sanity in the same devastating year. "Are you fighting?" Her question hung in the air between them, innocent and devastating. "No, sweetheart," Ben said, but his voice shook like earthquake tremors. "We're not fighting. We're just remembering something sad." Adrian backed away, her composure completely shattered now. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "I can't. This wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you were—" She turned and fled across the park, leaving Ben and Zoe alone with the weight of recognition and the terrible knowledge that some coincidences were actually destiny wearing a disguise. Zoe picked up the stone Adrian had touched, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "Daddy?" she said in French, their language for deep thoughts. Sometimes broken things find each other. The next morning brought rain and a text message that made Ben's coffee taste like ashes in his mouth. "Can we talk? I owe you an explanation." "Ah." He deleted it immediately, then spent 20 minutes staring at his phone, wondering if she'd send another. She didn't. But somehow that felt worse than if she'd flooded him with apologies or corporate speak explanations. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 5 years of consequences and the weight of choices neither of them could take back. Zoe noticed his distraction over breakfast, eating her precisely arranged blueberries in their mathematical pattern while watching him pace their small kitchen like a caged animal. "Daddy," she said in German, their language for serious conversations, "hast du Angst? Are you afraid?" The question stopped him cold. When had his 8-year-old daughter become so perceptive about adult fears? When had she learned to read the subtle signs of his distress better than trained psychiatrists? "A little," he admitted, sitting across from her at their second-hand table. Honesty was important with Zoe. Her autism made her especially sensitive to lies and half-truths, able to detect deception in ways that baffled experts. I met someone who knew me before we moved here. Zoe nodded gravely, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to understand adult concepts too early. Before Mama died? She asked in English, her voice small. Ben's throat closed. Yes, before that. She reached across the table and patted his hand with sticky, blueberry-stained fingers. Sometimes before people make now people sad, she said, with the wisdom of someone who'd experienced too much loss for her age. But sometimes they help fix broken things too. Ben stared at his daughter, this remarkable child who saw patterns in everything, who understood connections that escaped most adults. How did she know exactly what he needed to hear when he didn't even know it himself? Work provided no escape from the churning thoughts in his head. The Natural History Museum felt different now, every shadow potentially hiding Adrian's calculating gaze. Ben walked his rounds mechanically, checking locks and alarms while his mind churned through possibilities like a broken machine. What did she want? Why had she sought him out? Strategic consultants didn't accidentally stumble across their former victims in tourist crises. There had to be a reason, a plan, some corporate strategy he couldn't see yet. Mrs. Patterson from the gift shop cornered him during his lunch break, her radar for drama pinging like sonar. The 70-year-old widow had survived 3 husbands and 40 years of museum politics, giving her an uncanny ability to sense trouble from 3 floors away. "You look like death warmed over, honey," she said, offering him homemade cookies from her endless supply. "Woman troubles?" Ben nearly choked on his coffee, the question hitting closer to home than he'd expected. "Not exactly," he managed, though his voice betrayed him completely. Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled with the satisfaction of someone who'd just confirmed her suspicions. In my experience, when a man says, "Not exactly about woman troubles," it's always exactly woman troubles. She settled into the chair across from him, clearly prepared for a lengthy interrogation. "Want to tell me about her?" Ben shook his head, but Mrs. Patterson was undeterred. "Sometimes talking helps, dear, especially when the situation is complicated." That evening, Adrian was waiting outside Zoe's school like a ghost from his past made manifest. She stood apart from the other parents and caregivers, her expensive clothes and perfect posture marking her as foreign territory in this neighborhood of working families and struggling single parents. Zoe spotted her first, tugging Ben's sleeve and pointing with the directness that autism afforded her. "The sad lady is here," she announced in Italian, practicing her newest language acquisition. Should we say hello? Ben wanted to say no, wanted to take Zoe's hand and walk in the opposite direction, maintaining the careful distance that had kept them safe for 5 years. But Adrian had already seen them, had already started walking over with that measured corporate stride that probably cost more per step than most people made in an hour. "Hi," she said simply, her voice stripped of its previous confidence. "I was hoping we could try again. Yesterday got complicated." "That's one word for it," Ben replied, but he didn't walk away. Something about Adrian's presence felt different today, less calculated, more fragile. She wore dark circles under her eyes like medals of exhaustion, and her usually perfect hair showed signs of restless nights. "I brought something for Zoe," Adrian said, pulling a wrapped package from her designer bag. "If that's okay with you." Her deference surprised him. The corporate shark from yesterday had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely uncertain. Zoe's eyes lit up at the prospect of a gift, but she looked to Ben for permission first, a habit he'd instilled in her after too many well-meaning strangers had overwhelmed her with attention. He nodded reluctantly, and she accepted the package with both hands, unwrapping it with the careful precision she brought to everything. Inside was a beautiful book, Numbers in Nature, Mathematical Patterns Around the World. Zoe's gasp of delight was audible across the schoolyard. She immediately began flipping through pages of spirals, fractals, and geometric formations found in flowers, shells, and crystals. "Thank you," Ben said quietly, his anger softening slightly at Zoe's obvious joy. "She'll treasure this." Adrian smiled, and for a moment the professional mask slipped completely away. I remember being fascinated by patterns at her age, the way everything connects, even when it doesn't seem like it should. She paused, watching Zoe examine a photograph of nautilus shells. "I've been thinking about connections a lot lately, about cause and effect, about consequences I never bothered to consider." They walked slowly towards the parking area, Zoe absorbed in her new book, occasionally stopping to show them particularly striking photographs. "You knew who I was," Ben said eventually, his voice carefully controlled. "At the memorial. You recognized me before I even spoke." Adrian nodded, her composure cracking slightly. "Your file photo. I kept copies of all the personnel records from the restructuring. Told myself it was for legal protection, but..." She stopped walking, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I think I kept them because I needed to remember what efficiency costs. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross." "Why are you here, Adrian?" Ben asked. "In DC, I mean." "Really?" She was quiet for so long that Ben thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the evening traffic. "My company is being investigated. The 2019 restructuring, wrongful termination suits, questions about the decision-making process, congressional subpoenas. They want me to testify about the efficiency metrics I used to justify eliminating an entire department." Ben's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "The lawsuit is why I can't sleep at night." Adrian interrupted. "Why I took indefinite leave from my job. Why I keep seeing faces from those personnel files every time I close my eyes." She turned to face him fully, her corporate mask completely gone now. "I came here to figure out how to live with what I did. I didn't expect to run into one of the people whose life I destroyed. Is that what we're calling it now?" Ben's voice carried 5 years of buried anger, finally finding an outlet. "Destroyed? Because that's what it felt like when I got that termination notice 3 weeks after my wife died of cancer. When I had to sell our house to pay medical bills. When I moved my grieving 8-year-old daughter across the country to start over with nothing." Each word hit Adrian like a physical blow, and Ben found himself glad to finally have a target for his rage. Adrian flinched as if he'd struck her, but she didn't look away or make excuses. "I know," she whispered. "I know exactly what I did, Ben. I remember every name on that list, every face in those files. Rachel Carter, stage 4 ovarian cancer, medical bills exceeding $200,000, husband's income classified as non-essential contractor expenditure." The clinical recitation of his personal tragedy should have enraged him further, but instead it revealed something he hadn't expected. She truly did remember. She'd carried the weight of these details for 5 years. Zoe looked up from her book, sensing the tension crackling between the adults like static electricity before a storm. "Daddy, your voice is getting loud," she said in Spanish, her anxiety evident in the careful way she held her new book. "Are you using angry words?" Ben immediately softened his tone, crouching down to her level. "Sorry, sweetheart. We're having a grown-up conversation about something that happened a long time ago." But Zoe's perceptive gaze moved between them, reading emotions that adults tried to hide. "Adrian's eyes are leaking again," she observed with the blunt honesty that autism afforded her. They were. Adrian wiped her cheeks quickly, professionally, but the tears kept coming. I should go, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't fair to either of you. I shouldn't have come here. But as she turned to leave, Ben surprised himself by calling after her. Adrian, wait. She stopped, shoulders tense with anticipation. That coffee shop on Connecticut Avenue. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, just the two of us. She nodded without turning around and walked away into the gathering dusk, leaving Ben and Zoe standing in the school parking lot with more questions than answers. That night, Ben lay awake staring at the ceiling while Zoe slept peacefully in the next room, her new book open on the bedside table to a photograph of spiral galaxies. Some patterns, Ben thought, were too complex to see until you had enough distance. Tomorrow he would try to find the distance necessary to understand what Adrian Wells really wanted from him. The coffee shop buzzed with afternoon energy when Ben arrived the next day. Adrian sat in the corner booth, her fingers wrapped around a mug like it was an anchor keeping her from drowning. She'd aged years in the few days since their first encounter, the polished corporate exterior cracking to reveal something rawer and more human underneath. Ben ordered black coffee and slid into the seat across from her, maintaining careful distance like a negotiation between former enemies. Thank you for coming, Adrian said, her voice stripped of its previous confidence. I wasn't sure you would. Ben studied her face, noting the fine lines of stress around her eyes, the way her usually perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the toll this reunion was taking. I almost didn't, but Zoe asked me something this morning that I couldn't answer. Adrian leaned forward slightly, genuine curiosity replacing corporate calculation. What did she ask? She wanted to know if hurt people could become helping people. Ben said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug for warmth. She has this theory that everyone who helps lost tourists has been lost themselves at some point. The observation was so perfectly Zoe, seeing patterns and connections that escaped most adults, finding hope in the darkest situations. Adrian's laugh caught in her throat, brittle and sad. Your daughter is wise beyond her years. She had to grow up fast, Ben replied. We both did. When you lose everything in the span of a month, you learn to adapt or you don't survive. The weight of that statement settled between them like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through the careful politeness they'd been maintaining. Adrian opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, clearly struggling with words that carried the weight of 5 years' worth of guilt. Finally, she pulled out her phone and showed Ben a screenshot, an email draft with the subject line, Formal Notice of Resignation, A. Wells, CEO. I wrote this last night, she said, her voice barely audible above the coffee shop's ambient noise. Effective immediately. No transition period, no consulting contract, no golden parachute. Just done. Ben read the brief message, noting the formal language that tried to hide what was clearly an emotional decision. CEO. Ben's eyebrows shot up in surprise. You didn't mention that particular detail before. Adrian's smile was bitter as burnt coffee. Surprise. The efficiency expert got promoted. Turns out destroying people's lives is excellent for quarterly profits. She put the phone away, her hands shaking slightly. I built my entire career on what happened to you, to all of you. Every promotion, every success, every dollar I made, it all came from that decision. Ben felt his anger rising again. But underneath it was something else, something that looked suspiciously like pity for this woman who'd climbed so high on a ladder made of other people's misery. Why haven't you sent it? He asked. The resignation. Adrian stared into her coffee as if it held answers. Because resigning feels like running away, and I've been running from what I did for 5 years. Maybe it's time to stop running and start facing the consequences. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents that represented more than just paperwork. Personnel records, every person affected by the 2019 restructuring. 247 individuals. I've been tracking them down, one by one, trying to understand the real cost of my efficiency. Ben's hands shook as he opened the folder, seeing faces and names that represented real lives, real families, real tragedies that went far beyond corporate spreadsheets. Some found new jobs. Adrian continued relentlessly, as if confessing to a crime. Others didn't. Maria Santos started cleaning offices at night to support her 3 kids after losing her translation contract. Robert Kim lost his house and moved in with his elderly parents. Jennifer Walsh. Her voice broke completely. Jennifer Walsh took her own life 6 months after the layoffs, left behind 2 teenage daughters and a husband who still sends me emails asking why his wife had to die for corporate profits. The folder fell from Ben's hands, papers scattering across the small table like leaves in a storm. "Stop," he whispered, the weight of all those ruined lives suddenly crushing. "Please, just stop." But Adrian continued with the relentless precision of someone performing penance, forcing herself to confront every detail of the destruction she'd caused. "I have $42 million in personal assets, Ben. Investments, property, savings, stock options. I want to give it all away. Set up a fund to help everyone I hurt." "And you think that fixes it?" Ben's voice attracted attention from nearby tables, but he didn't care anymore. "You think money erases what you did? You think Jennifer Walsh's daughters give a damn about your guilt money?" His anger was white-hot now, 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding a target. Adrian absorbed each word like physical blows, but she didn't flinch away or make excuses. She sat there and took it, accepting his fury as her due. "No," she said quietly when his tirade finally ended. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know money can't bring back Jennifer Walsh, or restore the years you lost, or heal the trauma I caused your daughter. But it's all I have to offer. It's the only tool I know how to use." Her honesty was devastating in its simplicity. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or absolution. She was simply acknowledging the weight of her actions and trying to figure out how to live with it. Ben's phone buzzed urgently, a text from Mrs. Patterson that made his blood run cold. "Emergency at school pickup. Zoe's fine but asking for you. Come when you can." He stood abruptly, gathering the scattered papers. "I have to go. Zoe needs me." The fear in his voice was palpable, the terror that every single parent carried of their child being in distress and unreachable. Adrian started to rise as well, but Ben held up a hand. Don't follow me. This is complicated enough." But as he reached the cafe door, Adrian called after him. "Ben, wait." He turned, seeing her sitting amid the wreckage of their conversation, tears streaming down her face. "I know you hate me. I know I destroyed your life, and I can never undo that. But please, let me help somehow. Let me try to do something right for once." The desperation in her voice stopped him cold. This wasn't corporate manipulation or strategic positioning. This was raw human need. The need to matter, to contribute, to find some way to transform guilt into something useful. "I don't hate you," he said quietly, the admission surprising them both. "I hate what you represent. I hate the system that rewards people for treating human beings like numbers on a spreadsheet. I hate that people like Jennifer Walsh die while people like you get promoted." He paused, studying her tear-stained face. "But you? You're just another casualty of that same system. You just happened to be holding the weapon when it fired." Ben gathered the scattered papers quickly, stuffing them back into the folder with hands that shook from adrenaline and suppressed emotion. "Keep your money, Adrian. Set up your fund. Help the people on that list. But don't do it for me, and don't do it to ease your conscience." He paused at the table's edge, his voice softening slightly. "Do it because it's the right thing to do. Because maybe that's the only way either of us figures out how to move forward." Outside the coffee shop, Ben's phone rang with Mrs. Patterson's familiar number. Her voice was tight with the kind of worry that came from decades of caring about other people's children. "Honey, you need to get to the school. Zoe had what they're calling an episode. She's physically fine, but she's asking for you and won't talk to anyone else." Ben broke into a run, the folder clutched against his chest, Adrian's tear-stained face burning in his memory like an after-image of pain. He found Zoe in the principal's office, sitting in a plastic chair and rocking slightly, a self-soothing behavior that meant she was overwhelmed beyond her ability to cope. Her new book lay on the floor, pages torn and scattered, the beautiful mathematical patterns destroyed. "Daddy," she whispered when she saw him, her voice small and broken. "The patterns were wrong. Someone broke the patterns and I couldn't fix them." Ben knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms and feeling her trembling against his chest. Over Zoe's head, the principal explained what had happened. She was showing the book to her classmates during free reading time when another child grabbed it roughly. The pages tore, and Zoe became very upset. She kept saying something about broken spirals and people who hurt patterns and wouldn't let anyone comfort her. Ben closed his eyes, understanding perfectly. For Zoe, the torn book wasn't just damaged property. It was a metaphor for everything broken in their world, a symbol of how easily beautiful things could be destroyed by careless hands. As he carried Zoe to the car, Ben's phone buzzed with another message from Adrian. "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I'm still going to try to fix what I broke. All of it. I owe you that much and more." Ben looked down at his daughter, this brilliant child who saw mathematical patterns in everything, who understood that some breaks could be repaired and others left permanent scars. Maybe fixing broken patterns wasn't about money or guilt. Maybe it was about learning to see the connections that mattered most. That night, after Zoe was finally asleep with her carefully repaired book, Ben spread Adrian's papers across his kitchen table. 247 lives, 247 people whose patterns had been broken by efficiency experts and profit margins and corporate restructuring. He found his own file again, remembering the day he'd received the termination notice, the same day Rachel had started her final round of chemotherapy, when hope was already running out like sand through his fingers. But as he studied the other files, Ben began to see something Adrian might have missed in her corporate tunnel vision. These weren't just victims of restructuring. They were translators, linguists, cultural experts, people with skills the world desperately needed, people who could bridge gaps between languages and cultures and help lost tourists find their way home. People like himself, who'd spent 5 years hiding what they could do best because the world had told them they were obsolete. Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the person who hurts us is also the person who can heal us. Maybe she was right. Maybe Adrian Wells, for all her corporate sins and calculated cruelty, was exactly the kind of person who could help others rebuild what she'd helped destroy. Maybe fixing broken patterns required someone who understood how they'd been broken in the first place. The thought was both terrifying and strangely hopeful, like finding light in the deepest darkness. A week passed before Ben reached out to Adrian, 7 days of watching Zoe carefully tape her torn book back together, page by page, creating new patterns from the damaged ones. "See, Daddy?" she said in German one evening, showing him her meticulous repairs. "Sometimes broken things become more beautiful when you fix them with love." Out of the mouths of babes and autistic children came wisdom that escaped most adults entirely. Ben found Adrian sitting alone in Meridian Hill Park at sunset, occupying the same bench where they'd first really talked. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her revelations and the scope of the task she'd set for herself. The manila folder sat beside her, along with what appeared to be legal documents and a laptop computer. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said when Ben sat down, maintaining careful distance between them. "Zoe wanted me to give you something," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. She insisted on wrapping it herself, which took about an hour because the paper had to be perfectly aligned. Adrian opened it carefully, revealing one of Zoe's repaired book pages, now laminated and turned into a bookmark. On the back, Zoe had written in her careful, precise handwriting, "Broken patterns can be fixed with patient hands and kind hearts." Adrian's eyes filled with tears as she traced the laminated page with one finger. "She made this for me?" Ben nodded, watching emotions play across her face like weather patterns. "She says you have sad eyes like her daddy used to have, before he learned that helping people made the sadness smaller instead of bigger." The gift seemed to break something inside Adrian, some last wall of corporate reserve that had been holding her together. "Your daughter sees things the rest of us miss, doesn't she?" Adrian asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ben nodded. "She sees connections, patterns within patterns, mathematical relationships between things that seem completely unrelated." He gestured to the legal documents beside her. "She also sees potential in broken things. What are those papers?" Adrian picked up the stack of documents with hands that trembled slightly. "Incorporation papers for the Patterson Foundation, named after a wise woman who found me crying in the museum parking lot yesterday and told me that sometimes the person who hurts us is also the person who can heal us." Ben's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You talked to Mrs. Patterson?" The idea of these two women, one a corporate CEO, the other a museum gift shop manager, having a heart-to-heart conversation seemed surreal. "She has very strong opinions about people who hurt her friends," Adrian said, with something approaching a smile. "She also has strong opinions about second chances and the difference between guilt and genuine remorse. Apparently, I passed some kind of test I didn't know I was taking." The foundation documents were comprehensive, showing months of legal work and financial planning. Adrian had liquidated nearly everything: her penthouse apartment, investment portfolio, even her luxury car. $42 million, Adrian explained, seeing his shocked expression. "Placed in trust for displaced workers, their families, retraining programs, mental health support, and emergency assistance. There's a board of directors made up entirely of former employees, vocational counselors, and family members of people affected by corporate restructuring. I'm not even on it." The magnitude of what she was proposing was staggering, but Ben found himself focusing on something else entirely. "Where will you live?" he asked. "What will you do with yourself?" Adrian shrugged, the gesture more vulnerable than any corporate presentation she'd ever given. "I rented a small apartment in Adams Morgan. 1 bedroom, no doorman, neighbors who argue in 3 different languages. As for what I'll do—" She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "I was hoping you might have some suggestions. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you've been thinking about this too." Ben studied her face, noting the complete absence of calculation in her expression. "You're serious about this? Starting over from scratch?" It wasn't a question. He could see the determination in her posture, the way she held herself like someone who'd finally found solid ground after years of shifting sand. "Completely serious. I spent 5 years climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. Now I want to find the right wall, even if I have to start at the bottom again. The foundation will help people financially," Ben said slowly, thinking out loud. "But what about the other kind of help? The kind that requires more than money?" Adrian leaned forward, genuinely curious. "What do you mean?" Ben watched a young couple struggle with a map nearby, speaking what sounded like Portuguese and looking completely lost. "I mean people like us, people who speak 8 languages between panic attacks, people who see patterns in chaos but forgot how to trust their own abilities." Understanding dawned in Adrian's eyes. You're talking about putting the skills back to work, not just compensating for the damage, but actually using what was lost. Ben nodded. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you applied for a part-time position at the museum, tour guide for international visitors. Adrian's laugh was self-deprecating. I did, though I'm not sure they'll hire someone whose only relevant experience is making people unemployed. Turns out, corporate efficiency expert isn't great preparation for helping confused tourists. No, Ben agreed. But person learning to be human again might be exactly what's needed. Someone who understands what it's like to be lost and looking for direction. He paused, watching the Portuguese couple finally find their bearings with help from a kind stranger. The foundation could do more than just provide financial assistance. It could help people remember who they were before the world told them they were obsolete. As they walked back toward the parking area, Adrian asked quietly, "Do you think Zoe would be okay with seeing me again, occasionally?" The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. She was asking for permission to become part of their lives, however peripherally. Ben considered the question seriously, thinking about his daughter's remarkable ability to see good in people that others had written off. "I think Zoe would be okay with having another person in her life who understands that broken patterns can be fixed with patient hands and kind hearts," he said finally. "But it would have to be genuine. She can spot fake kindness from a mile away, and she doesn't forget when people disappoint her." Adrian nodded solemnly, accepting the conditions like a sacred trust. For the first time since their paths had crossed again, Ben felt something that might eventually become hope. 6 months later, Ben stood in the exact spot where his old life had ended, and his new one began. Lincoln Memorial Plaza bustled with its usual mix of tourists and locals, but today felt different, charged with possibility instead of weighed down by the past. He wasn't alone this time. Zoe sat on the memorial steps, arranging a new set of stones Adrian had brought her from the Smithsonian's geology collection. These stones were special, each one representing a different country, a different language, a different culture that had contributed to human understanding. Zoe was creating what she called her world spiral, a mathematical pattern that somehow managed to include everyone while excluding no one. Her autism gave her a unique perspective on inclusion. She saw connections where others saw differences, found unity in diversity that escaped most neurotypical minds. "It's like people," she explained to anyone who would listen. "Different shapes and colors, but they all make the pattern more beautiful." Adrian emerged from the memorial building, leading a group of 12 international visitors with the confidence of someone who'd finally found her calling. Her tour guide badge caught the afternoon sunlight as she gestured toward the inscription above Lincoln's statue, switching effortlessly between languages: French for the elderly couple from Lyon, Spanish for the family with young children from Barcelona, German for the backpacking students from Munich. She'd learned well in 6 months, trading corporate efficiency for human connection. "Daddy," Zoe said in Korean, her newest language acquisition, "Adrian looks happy today." Ben nodded, noting the genuine smile on Adrian's face as she helped a confused tourist find his group. The calculating mask was gone completely now, replaced by something warmer and infinitely more authentic. This was what healing looked like, not the absence of scars, but the transformation of wounds into wisdom, pain into purpose. When the tour ended, Adrian walked over to join them on the steps. She wore comfortable walking shoes and a museum polo shirt, a far cry from the designer clothes of their first meeting. Her apartment in Adams Morgan might be small, but it had given her something her penthouse never had: neighbors who knew her name, a corner store owner who saved her the newspaper, children who waved from school bus windows. Community, belonging, home. "How did it go?" Ben asked, though the answer was written across her face in lines of satisfaction and genuine joy. "Amazing," Adrian replied, settling beside Zoe on the warm stone steps. 3 different families, 2 solo travelers, and 1 couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. The anniversary couple spoke only Portuguese, and when I told them about Lincoln's marriage to Mary Todd, they started crying. Her voice carried wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe that her words could bring joy instead of devastation. Zoe looked up from her stones, her pattern nearly complete. "Happy crying or sad crying?" she asked with the directness that made her such an effective judge of character. "Happy crying, sweetheart," Adrian assured her. They said it reminded them of their own love story, how they'd overcome obstacles and stayed together through difficult times. The parallel wasn't lost on any of them. Stories of love persevering despite hardship resonated differently when you'd lived through your own trials. "I have news," Adrian said, pulling out an official-looking letter with excitement barely contained in her voice. The Patterson Foundation received its first major corporate donation, technology company in Seattle, going through their own restructuring. They want to use our model instead of just laying people off. Ben read the letter, noting not just the substantial monetary amount, but the tone of respect and collaboration that would have been impossible to imagine 6 months ago. $2 million, he said, genuinely impressed. That's incredible. But Adrian's smile suggested there was more to the story. It gets better. They want to hire foundation consultants to help with the transition, make sure their displaced workers get retraining, job placement assistance, emotional support, and dignity throughout the process. She paused meaningfully, her eyes bright with possibility. They specifically requested someone with linguistic skills and crisis management experience. Ben looked up from the letter, understanding dawning. "Are you offering me a job?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. She was offering him a chance to use his abilities again, to help people instead of hiding from his past. "I'm offering you a choice," Adrian clarified. The position would require travel, maybe a week each month. Zoe could come along sometimes. They specifically mentioned wanting to create family-friendly policies that support single parents. Zoe made the decision for them, as she often did with her uncanny ability to cut through adult complications. "Daddy," she said in Italian, switching languages as her emotions required. "Possiamo aiutare altre famiglie? Can we help other families?" Ben looked at his daughter, this wise child who'd taught him that broken things could become more beautiful when mended with love and patience. "Would you want to do that, sweetheart?" he asked. "Help other families like ours?" The question was important. Zoe's needs had to come first, always, but he also knew she thrived when she felt useful, when her unique perspective could help others navigate confusing situations. "Sí," Zoe replied in Spanish, nodding emphatically. "Pero solo si Adrian viene también." But only if Adrian comes too. Adrian blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting to be included in Zoe's conditions. "You want me to come with you?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Zoe nodded solemnly, her expression serious as she considered her words. "You understand the broken patterns now, and you're learning to fix them with patient hands like Daddy taught me." The simple acceptance in her voice was devastating in its generosity. This child who'd lost so much was willing to share her most precious possession, her father's attention, with the woman who'd once threatened their security. Ben felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of muscles he hadn't realized were still tense, a release of breath he'd been holding for 5 years. "Okay," he said, the word carrying the weight of forgiveness and the lightness of new beginnings. "We'll try it, all 3 of us." Adrian's smile could have powered the entire National Mall, radiant with joy and possibility, and the kind of hope that comes from second chances. "Really?" she asked, as if she couldn't quite believe that happiness was allowed to be this simple. "Really?" Ben confirmed. "But I have conditions." Her expression grew serious, ready to accept whatever boundaries he needed to set. "Name them," she said, and he could hear echoes of the corporate negotiator she'd once been, but softened now by genuine care and respect. "First, Zoe's needs come first, always. If the travel becomes too much for her, if she gets overwhelmed or needs stability, we reassess everything." Adrian nodded immediately. "Absolutely. Her well-being is non-negotiable." The quick agreement told Ben she understood what it meant to prioritize a child's needs over adult ambitions, another sign of how much she'd changed. "Second, we do this right. No cutting corners, no efficiency metrics that treat people like numbers on spreadsheets. We take whatever time is necessary to actually help, even if it's not cost-effective." This condition was about more than just work methods. It was about ensuring that their new venture wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. "Agreed," Adrian said firmly. "People matter more than profits, always. And third—" Ben paused, watching a new group of confused tourists gather near the monument, clearly needing assistance. "We remember why we're doing this. Not for our guilt or our redemption, but because people deserve better than being treated as expendable." Adrian followed his gaze to the lost tourists, understanding immediately what he was suggesting. "Should we?" she asked, and in those two words Ben heard everything that had changed between them. The shift from suspicion to trust, from individual pain to shared purpose. He stood, extending his hand to help Zoe collect her stones. "We should. Together." The word felt natural now, no longer weighted with corporate implications or legal complications. Just three people who'd learned that healing happened when you helped others find their way. As they approached the Vietnamese family who looked overwhelmed and lost, Ben heard Zoe whisper to Adrian in French, "Merci pour nous avoir appris que les gens perdus peuvent retrouver leur chemin." "Thank you for teaching us that lost people can find their way home." Adrian squeezed the little girl's hand gently. "Merci de m'avoir appris que certaines blessures guérissent en aidant les autres." "Thank you for teaching me that some wounds heal by helping others." The Vietnamese family looked up hopefully as Ben began speaking their language, asking if they needed assistance. Behind him, Adrian and Zoe stood ready to help. Three people who'd learned that sometimes the most broken patterns create the most beautiful new designs when rebuilt with patience, love, and the understanding that everyone deserves a second chance to find their way home. The afternoon sun slanted across the Memorial Plaza, illuminating tourists and locals alike in golden light, and for the first time in years, Ben felt truly at peace with who he'd become. Some words, it turned out, really didn't need translation. Love, hope, forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings spoke the same language in every culture, every heart, every story that ended with the understanding that broken people could heal each other when they chose connection over isolation, service over self-interest, and love over fear. The pattern was complete, beautiful in its imperfection, stronger for having been broken and mended with care.